live. Well, not really live by the time you see this, but we are in the Bellagio now in beautiful Las Vegas, and we are here with Ops Talks. We got Zach and Cam here this morning. We went into the Apartment Strategies Conference with some predictions, and we literally just walked out of there, 15 minutes ago, I think, or something. So it was 7 hours. And for those of you unfamiliar, the NMHC obviously has an annual show, but then they sort of do a conference within a conference. So there's the Apartment Strategies show that they do every year, where they basically have economists, owners, third-party managers, financiers all get together and really kind of outlay what their sentiment is for the industry going into the next year. And so if you were at Apartment Strategies last year, it was a bit somber. The mantra was, do you remember what the mantra was?
2024 was a year of survival.
Right. and then survived till 25, right? So it was not a bullish tone at all. And, Zach and Cam gave their predictions. And anyway, we just got to the session. And I guess, Zach, Cam, what were your hot takes from the show at a high level? What was the takeaway?
Yeah, no, I think there were a lot of big talking points, but I think just doing a recap of 2024, obviously a lot of people were definitely looking at it as a year of, okay, let's get through this. We're probably not going to get the returns that we expected. We're probably not going to get the vacancy rates that we expected. Yeah. But what the industry ended up finding out is that it actually ended up turning into a year of demand in the second half of the year, which was a big surprise for even the economists, for operators, owners, investors, and so forth. So that was positive. So with that ending, us going into obviously the first half of 2025, obviously there's still a lot of concerns. I don't think we're out of the waters yet, so to speak. But I think the sentiment is 2025 will be a year of transition. And I think it's shaping up to be a positive year, and hopefully a positive year of good change.
What about you, Cam? What's your take?
Yeah, I think
first Apartment Strategies, by the way.
My very first.
So where you just pounded over the head with all that data and all the sessions.
There was a lot of note taking, that's for sure. I think
he has 7 pages. How many pages? Look, show him your notebook.
It's full. It's full. Completely full. No, I think obviously one of the big high points or a positive note was that there was a pop in demand at the second half of 2024. Yeah. There's a lot of different demographic information that you could look at for that, but one thing that was discussed was that young men are starting to re-enter into the rental housing space. That we're starting to see some uncoupling of housing, and that's going to continue to, uncoupling of households, which is going to continue to increase demand. So demand is really strong, but overwhelmingly, every single talk that we heard, we're still undersupplied to meet the demands of the market, and it's still challenging to make new construction starts pencil out. That's getting closer. We're getting closer and closer and closer further we go along, but there's still a huge need to refresh that supply. I think a lot of investors are prioritizing suburban markets for when they're looking for those new developments. I think there's more established yields and returns for those specific developments. There is a revitalization of urban core, but it's still not there yet, and the rents long-term still haven't been proven. It is getting better, but still I think the suburban markets are outshining urban core.
Yeah, and I think there were some talks that alluded to, could there be a return to urbanization now with, obviously remote work is not going to stop. It's only going to grow. But one of the talks was really interesting, and it talked about how that drives housing demand for more office space within the home. So it was really interesting overall. But yeah, again, to give you a sense, it's 7 hours of talks, right? And so I think my favorite and probably because I was very alert. It's the first talk was the macroeconomic outlook, and it had Fannie Mae and the Brookings Institute, and they were talking about. And the joke was, what did you guys all do to deserve two economists talking at 8 a.m. As your wake-up conference? So that was, I thought, an interesting talk because it really talked about basically what you two predicted, which was they sort of referenced that the first half of the year, it's basically gearing up for the second half. I think they mentioned two interesting things. One, which is the Fed is meeting today, and I think they're making a decision tomorrow. And the decision is expected to be no change in interest rates till June, where I think there's quarter point predicted and then another quarter. So we're only expecting 2 basis cuts. But one of the funniest and most interesting things from that talk was they were referencing, inflationary market, and that inflation, if you look at it statistically, has cooled off, but the feeling of inflation still lingers. And one of the interesting points that I think it was Justin Wolfers from the Brookings Institute. I have it on my notes. See, I took notes here, but they're here, not on paper. But he referenced that the feeling is so bad because most of the people in the market now never went through a recession. Yeah. And so I looked it up, and I think he was 52, so he made the joke, a lot of people out there don't understand what a recession or an inflationary period is. And I looked it up, and he's right. Only 34% of the population is above 50, and the other 66% is under 50, which sort of really woke me up and shined a light on there's that sentiment is out there, because he's right that a lot of us have never been through an inflationary period. If you're 50, you went through this in the 70s, you saw it happen. Now it's like, oh, I recognize that. For us, like all of us, I think we're all under 50, right? So you probably haven't been through that period. And it was interesting to hear that and how it impacts housing. I don't know. I thought that was an interesting tidbit that I took away from one of the talks. And I guess the leading question for you guys is, there was, again, 7 hours of things we talked through. What was one of the more impactful talks that you heard, and what was maybe a data point or something that was interesting that kind of lingered with you? Big question, I know. Do you need to take a look at your notes? I know you took a lot. You can. It's not cheating if you take a look at your notes.
Well, no. I was just thinking I wanted to dovetail off of your point. What he essentially said was that a lot of people are feeling the pain of inflation right now because they don't have the understanding that they will be made whole through wage growth.
Right.
And so right now, a lot of it is just looking at elevated prices and not necessarily feeling that correlation versus those who went through those periods in the 80s have a better understanding of what that long-term impact and feeling of inflation is going to be.
Well, and then there's like kind of the fear of AI, right? And am I going to see a wage increase, or is AI going to replace me? So I think that was alluded to, and I think he even made the joke. Look, I'm here. I'm an economist, and what do? I read various sources. I consume sources and spit out a data point. He goes, well, what does ChatGPT do? Or what do these AI do? They consume a lot of sources. Exactly that, yeah. And I think he made the joke, good thing I'm tenured. But that was probably my favorite talk of them all. What about you, Zach? You've been quiet over there.
No, you guys have hit it on the head. No, I think one of there's actually 2 points that I really took away from it outside of what we've discussed already, and it was actually the saying, "Build, baby, build." I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing, the housing crisis, whether it be rental, affordable, etc., can be solved by more supply, especially in areas where demand is high. Obviously, we do need to be specific, as we talked, like the Sun Belt had way too much supply and now is seeing the effects of that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that is the same across every other market. And I think there were quite a few examples that were discussed. where there are no issues. So I think with hopefully some lessening of restrictions and requirements for operators, owners, GCs, brokers to be able to invest or develop any of these sites, I think it'll be or have a pretty substantial impact on the industry as a whole. And then the other one is, despite multiple years of ups and downs with the outlook, whether it be 2025, 2024, 23, et cetera, pre-pandemic, there's one key point or topic that has stayed consistent, and that's been centralization.
Yeah.
So it was always positive to really see how operators, regardless of what's going on or how they're acquiring or whether they're developing or not, they're still looking at ways to optimize their businesses, and it's reassuring to see that. That despite all that's said and done, they're still looking for ways, whether it be technology, whether it be people, whether it be policy that they have internally, to help run their business more effectively and be able to see a return, not only for their business, but a positive experience for their residents, for their site teams, and their staff. So it's always good to see operators that are really putting their best foot forward when it comes to technologies to help with that process.
Yeah, and a couple of them are really transparent, right? About
Yeah.
like, I think one operator on stage went, "Yes, I wanted to do centralization because I wanted to reduce costs." I mean, that was a super transparent like message, because some people dance around it, and I thought it was one of the good talking points. One of the talks was really referencing was knowing what you want to do, what problem you want to solve with a pilot, and knowing if you need to pull the plug or scale it out. And so I actually respected that, because I can't remember the operator, it's off the top of my head, but
Donna.
was it Donna at Gables? Yeah, Donna at Gables was talking about, if you're really committed to doing a pilot, make sure you don't just chase the shiny thing and you actually solve a problem. And if it doesn't work out, there was another thing too where they required a business case, right, to roll out any technology. I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Make sure you're actually solving for something and tying, either reduction in costs or replacement of another service. There needs to be a clear ROI, and it was very refreshing to hear that. But yeah, I think if you're playing centralization bingo at home, I think you heard centralization at least 6 or 7 times, which is a good thing for vendors like us, because that's what we focus on.
But it was very specific centralization that they were talking about. A lot of it, I think we consistently hear this. It's bundled into what the assistant community manager used to do, or in some cases may still do. A lot of it's admin, bringing in some application processing,
Right.
Compliance, litigation, ledgers, bringing that all into a centralized role.
Very specific, you're right, because before it was like centralization, and no one really detailed what that meant. And you're like, yeah, we're all centralizing, but now you're actually hearing detailed like use cases of centralization, which is like, oh yes, people are actually doing it. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll talk a little bit more on that talk. I mean, I thought that they. So it was a panel of Gables Residential, Waterton, Pasco, who's just a straight owner, and I'm forgetting there was.
I'm going to look
Waterton.
on the agenda for you.
I don't know if I said Waterton, but
you did.
So they said the three main things that they're focused on right now is, as we just talked about, centralization. The other one is expense control, which really centralization is being used as a cure for bringing down expenses, and the other one was risk mitigation. And I thought the risk mitigation piece was interesting. Of course, talking about things that we commonly speak to owners and operators about, your leak detection, your fire abatement, things like that. But another topic that they talked about that I don't necessarily frequently think about is local regulatory changes and how that can actually be preventative to doing a deal in a specific market.
Yeah, there was a really interesting point and I can't remember which of the 7 hours talk it was talking about, but there was, now it's all like, it's 3:30, we just got out of there, and we're doing this. So thank you guys for being so great about doing it. I dragged them around to find a place to film, so they were very kind enough to be patient with us. But no, one of the things that was really interesting was that, part of the supply problem is just due to the there's no federal mandate to build housing, right? And so, whereas in some nations, and I actually think this was an economic talk, they were talking about this, because the gentleman was from either Australia or New Zealand, I can't recall, but he was talking about how in other countries it's federally mandated, like, hey, you need to have this supply. And so obviously it's challenging in the US because you really rely on local municipalities to zone and regulate. So there is an opportunity for the government to help with those sort of transactions, because if we're all saying, hey, there is a supply problem, and we need more supply, like we could mandate that. I mean, that is an interesting thought I hadn't thought about, and to hear that from an economist was like, oh, that's a really interesting point. And then to your point in that talk, it was navigating market trends and maximizing opportunities. I pulled the syllabus, but because it was a lecture, right? It was a syllabus. But when I heard the leak sensor, I was like, oh yeah, like great use case for smart home technology. So that was really good to see. And again, it's refreshing to hear specific NOI, ROI opportunities in technology that are centralized. Like, you're hearing more and more specific use cases, which is really good.
And not to interrupt you, but
no, please do. It's Ops Talks.
Yeah, I think this is such an important part. The leak. When you look at the scheme and the scope of IoT deployments, or smart home deployments, let's not use that term, but just smart home deployments, a lot of focus is on the locks and secondarily on the thermostat. And I always say leak detection is not a sexy wow topic, and it's not generating returns, but it is still critical, because when you look at the impact of having a leak, whether it's the cost of just simply water usage or the really astronomical costs associated with not catching that leak in time, and the damage that can cost, you're not necessarily, because it is preventative, you're not seeing that ROI on a monthly basis on the ledger, but when it happens, it pays for itself, and a lot of times 10x in preventing those damages.
It's definitely one of those things where it's great. But when you try to pitch the savings, it's like, well, we didn't have a leak. And I think for us, that's typically anywhere from $30,000 to sometimes $70,000. So it's definitely one of those, again, under the damage prevention umbrella, so to speak, products that doesn't get a lot of attention because, as you said, it's not as sexy, but it really does play a role, especially for those that are having a lot of issues. But it's like we've said, it's reassuring to hear that smart home, self-guided tours, even administrative tasks, people are being highlighted when it comes to centralization. And I think that's going to be extremely important as we go through 2025, and it's going to be even more important as we proceed through the beyond. So excited to see what's in store.
Any other takeaways, fun facts?
I mean,
Now's your time. To flex a stat that you learned or something that was. What was a powerful takeaway? What was your?
Yeah, I don't have a stat to go with this, but I think one of the interesting, obviously with this conference, a lot of what people are doing here is looking for capital, allocating capital, and the feedback is still that a lot of institutional investors are sitting in the wings until those returns really start to get to be where they want them to be in order to make those investments. So diversifying where that capital is coming from is pretty important. I think we've been hearing more increasingly some leveraging of foreign capital or sovereign
Sovereign.
funds. But also just a high net worth, family offices, just turning to those as different sources of funding to make the deal work. I think is going to be, at least from that panel, it was an important part of the equation for success.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to add on, it was definitely interesting to hear the financing side component and how people are looking at outside sources of funding and being able to really finance these projects. So I think that was definitely an interesting turn, but I think the biggest one for me is just that 2025 is going to be a transition year, and everything is building up for it to really be a good year at the end of it. So I know coming from last year, whether you were a vendor, an owner, an operator, a V manager, you were definitely figuring out ways to cut costs and really do with what you had. And I think this year will be that first shift where we're hopefully looking at the bigger picture and reinvesting in not only our people, but our communities.
I think one thing that they said was that stuck with me was we have to get through the first half of the year. Yep. And so short-term strategies on long-term investments was one of the big takeaways for the first half of the year. Yep.
Yeah, I think probably the point that resonated with me the most, which actually last night when we were meeting with people organically, it was sort of anchored to is, first of all, it's definitely a better outlook than last year. I cannot emphasize that enough. Yeah. Like that, you can feel the sentiment in the room.
Although the second half went well, which was unexpected.
Right. So, but the sentiment was clearly there. Yeah. A more positive sentiment than last year at this year's show, and you could hear it last night. It just seems like this year there's more, I'll say, acceptance of, hey, if you had a bad deal, just sell it off and move on. Take the loss and just reinvest. And I think a lot more people are bullish. A lot of owners, operators, and even bankers tend to be more bullish. I think there was one talking point where someone was mentioning they got 42 term sheets. So, and they had to, they didn't want to wait through 42 term sheets. So the owner operator actually set their own terms and see who could meet their bid. So it's definitely a more positive dynamic than it was last year. And so hopefully that'll allow for a lot of growth for the industry, and of course, hopefully for vendors like us. So. So it was a great show. It was a great, I'll say, apartment strategies conference. We still have another 2 days of this trade show, but all in all, I think it went really well. So I'm looking forward to 2025. How about you guys?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
So that was it. You got first peek at apartment strategies conference, and hope you enjoyed. And that's Ops Talk. Thanks again. Bye.